substance. It was like the Al Capone case. Al Capone is reputed to have been a perpetrator of many crimes, but he was never convicted for any of those crimes. He was convicted supposedly for tax evasion.
Correct.
This is what's going on with the elder abuse cases. They are not been decided by the obvious abuses that are going on, and often they are being decided by things that are really quite secondary of importance. And that's very troubling to me.
I'd like you to speak to that.
Well, I want to first offer my condolences over the loss of your father and the terrible circumstance that you went through in that regard, and I certainly welcome your efforts to educate the public as to the problems that are going on, and welcome you joining the fight against elder fraud. I think that the video is just a small piece of the puzzle here. You see 3 minutes of someone's life, and the question in a situation like this is, the primary question is, was this woman competent to understand the nature of the documents that she was signing and what their effect was? That's not an easy question to answer. Just looking at that 3-minute video, in fact, I showed it to some of my friends and my wife and such, and I get different reactions. Some people say, well, she's clearly incompetent. Other people say, well, she seemed to understand what she was doing. So you have to really look the rest of the story. You have to look at the background. And here, you know, the lawyer obviously did not believe that he was doing something wrong, or he would not have taped it.
He would not have.
In many cases of elder fraud, these documents are executed secretly. There's no one present.
Really?
Except the perpetrator.
Okay.
And shoves a paper under the nose of someone, and no one sees what's going on. Here, at least there's a camera and with a microphone, and you can hear and judge for yourself.
That's interesting. What are your thoughts?
I have several. Most importantly, I would say that I would disagree totally with what Craig said when he said what was most important was whether she was competent or not. I think what was most important is whether she was being taken advantage of or not, which is a totally different question.
Is that a legal question?
It's also a legal question. And I think that one of the big problems we have in dealing with these cases of severe versus mild cognitive impairment, cases like this one in this video, is we confuse the two issues between the importance of whether she was competent or whether she was being taken advantage of. And because of this, we often decide these cases based on statements by doctors saying, well, the person, in my opinion, was competent to sign the document.
Now, let me interrupt. What is your definition of competent versus being taken advantage of? Because the assumption is if you're incompetent, you're more open to being taken advantage of versus if you're competent.
To answer your question, I'd like to point out the following, which Craig can address, I'm sure, as a lawyer. You can be perfectly competent. In fact, by definition, you have to be competent to be a victim of fraud.
Okay.
So, again, if you're talking about a fraud case, is it important that you were competent, or was it important that you were being taken advantage of? In this case, if you decide that she was competent, you still have the question of was she being taken advantage of. Now, there's a clear sign that there was a concern by the lawyer that she was not competent, or questions would be raised about her competency. And that is because he made the video. He had the question, he had the concern, so he made the video. So the question wasn't whether she was competent, which maybe the video does or doesn't show depending on your definition of competency, but it doesn't go into the questions. No questions were asked to find out if she was being taken advantage of. For example, was her daughter notified that this was going on? Now, the daughter's the one that provided me this video and provided it to the authorities. It was entered into evidence. So there was no protection because the daughter wasn't notified. Now, obviously, the courts eventually sided with the daughter. But again, the daughter had to go through what she has had to go through and why she is giving the video out to me to share with others because of how it affected her. So again, the emphasis on competency is a question that's been so perverted by our courts that it is actually almost meaningless. Here in Ohio, as reported by a Legislative Service Commission back in 1994 in regards to one of my legal reforms I proposed, the definition in the case Bevan versus State of Ohio, or Bevan versus Bevan, I don't remember the exact citation anymore, stated that if you are hallucinating or delusional, I think was the word. If you are
Okay.
delusional, a document you will sign will still be upheld, even if you're delusional, unless it can be proved two things. First, that it was an insane delusion.
An insane.
An insane delusion. So not just being delusional itself. I mean,
Okay.
to me, what's the difference? I don't want to get into that. The second thing is you have to prove that that insane delusion caused you to sign it. Now, one of the problems is this lady, I believe, if I remember correctly, the report, she died 9 days afterwards.
She died 9 days after this video?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
Related to the cause for her hospitalization?
yes,
Okay.
you know, she was in a very bad situation.
Yes, okay.
In my dad's case, he died within hours.
Within hours?
Yes. He was on a morphine drip and under a do not resuscitate order while he was being taken advantage of. His cancer had ruptured his stomach that morning. The nurse had found him writhing in pain in his bed, called a doctor to his bedside. She couldn't even get his pulse without Doppler effect or something like that. And basically, she called the doctor. The doctor started my father on fluids. You know, he had a living will expressing he didn't want to be resuscitated, but because of the emergency, you know, he didn't have time to consult it, I guess, or it wasn't in the record. Whatever the reason was, he resuscitated my father. Explained to my father what his choices were. My father said he didn't want to be resuscitated. The doctor entered a do not resuscitate order into the record, put him on morphine, and then all hell broke loose.
I'd like to shift to Craig because he's brought up a lot of issues that, because I'm not an attorney, but do give me some cause for maybe definitional clarification for my viewers. And can you frame this? Because I don't want to just focus on that video. That was a very troubling video because the objectivity that I always applaud myself, which is I'm always objective, you know, substantiates facts, it was difficult. So let's frame it in a broader context.
I think the video is a helpful illustration of the issues that we face here. But,
Okay.
but in the broad context, I believe competency is a key factor, and I have to disagree with Tom on that. The question here is when people are signing documents, what do they want?
Right.
Because the law should affect what they want. And are they being taken advantage of, not being taken advantage of? That depends on what they want. And in order to have ideas and to know what you want, you have to be competent. You have to understand who you are, who your family is, who your friends are. You have to have some sense of what your assets are in order to make what are called testamentary decisions, decisions about what do I want to happen after I die. Well, you've got to know enough about your circumstance. That's competency. That's testamentary capacity. Do you know who you are? Do you know who your friends are? Do your family? Do you have a sense of what you have?
Now, does the law establish these thresholds in determining competency?
There are factual questions.
Okay.
Okay, and you look at sometimes to medical experts.
Okay.
You know, the doctors that might be able to testify as to, well, this person was on a medication and were virtually sleeping at the time. But I'm not talking about this video, but just generally. So
In general,
doctors
yeah,
can,
just establishing
can
a
comment
context.
upon it, and also family members and friends that get to know the person. The second area that you're looking into, so one is competency. Did the individual, did they know what they were doing? Did they have the mental capacity to understand the nature of what they were doing? Secondly, were they unduly influenced? So someone can be competent, but tricked.
Yeah.
That
That
happens a lot
happens
of
a lot of
happens
times to
You can be
normal people.
Yes, sometimes you can be a rocket scientist and
be
be in the
tricked.
top of your game, and you can be a victim of a scam.
Right.
It happens all the time.
Right.
Bernie Madoff. You know,
Classic.
some of his
Classic.
victims were brilliant, successful people. No question as to their competency. But there's some subjective questions as to whether someone is undue influenced, under undue influence. Here, the background of this case involved a contest between two people who wanted this woman's house. One was the daughter, and the other two were these two men that were close friends. I mean, there'd been a long-standing relationship.
These
between-
were, the two men were attorneys?
No,
No,
two
they
men
were not.
They were not
Oh, my
attorneys.
goodness.
No,
Okay, they
no.
were not
Correct.
attorneys.
They're just associates of her.
Okay, okay.
Correct. And the question was, what did she really want to happen to that house?
Okay.
So that's not an easy question. Sometimes people may think, well, it should have gone to the daughter.
Well, it's the
But-
mother's decision.
Correct. Correct.
Period.
And I've been practicing law for 35 years now.
Yeah.
I've had clients that don't want their estate to go to their children for whatever reason. Or they might want to go to one child but not another.
Yes,
These
yes.
are, and as long as the person understands the nature of their choices, then they should be allowed to make that determination. Now here Tom talked about the outcome of this case, but it's not as clear as some might believe, because the one individual that benefited from this document, one of the men
two
that she
men,
knew, correct, he was eventually convicted,
Okay.
but the court sentenced him to a $1,000 fine and 30 days in jail.
Are you
So-
serious?
This is correct. Which tells me, what does this tell
Well,
you?
it tells you that the court was not crisp
It
on the
tell-
data, perhaps, the
well,
information?
it tells you that this is theft, if,
Yeah.
if it's proven.
Yeah.
And and the courts have discretion in sentencing. The maximum sentence in a case like this, I believe, under that law at the time was, I think, in 20 years or more. That means that the judge, after seeing the evidence, he saw more than just this video. He saw the whole, he had all the witnesses. He decided that, well, it's not as bad as it looks. Otherwise, he would have imposed the biggest sentence. If the judge was convinced that this woman was clearly taken advantage of and her wishes were not upheld, he would have been more inclined to 20 years. So
One would think.
you would think. You
Yeah,
would
one
think.
would
So
think.
we don't know. We don't know what was going on there, but there's some indication that there's more to this story than meets the eye. These are very difficult cases. They're very fact intensive to determine. One, did the person have competence? Do they understand what they were doing? Two, were they unduly influenced? Because the person is gone. By the time these cases are in front
They
of a
can't
court,
talk from the
they
grave.
cannot talk from the grave.
They cannot.
Correct. And a lot of times
do it.
elders are isolated. That's one thing I liked about this video, because you could see the circumstances surrounding the signing, and then you can make your own conclusions and hear the other evidence. But 99% of the time, this is done in secret. This is done where
With no
camera,
nothing.
no audio recording. All of a sudden, the person is dead. It's a year later. A will turns up that has unusual provisions in it. No one even knew that, gosh, Mom had signed a will giving everything to my, my cousin and wiping out the rest of the family. It doesn't make sense. Mom loved us.
I'm just going to say as a sidebar, is that, because I specialize in asset protection for seniors. I have for 30 years, and I just had the shock of my life because one of my clients for almost 20 years died rather quickly from pancreatic cancer. I was not aware, and there is a trust instrument that he executed without my knowledge. Of course, you have no way to get trust is end of story, but he poured all of those investment assets into that trust and carved out his daughter. And we don't know where the money went. We don't know where the money went. We don't know the attorneys involved. Obviously, it's a legitimate trust instrument.
You hope.
Well, it was an irrevocable. Because I did check with one of my companies, and they said, Michelle, it dispersed into an irrevocable trust dated, and I was like, this happened a couple of months before he died. And I have no way of knowing or even getting resolution, and the daughter is devastated.
Well, a good indication I find